Hello guys, welcome back to another PE Portal group class. Today we are going to be looking at the socio-cultural influences in sport, which is drawn from the social and cultural unit of the exam spec. In particular today we are going to be looking at social groups. How do we categorise a social group? First of all, what is a social group? Then we're going to look at how to actually categorise some, and we are going to be looking at 5 different examples of 5 broader areas within which we can start to pick out some social groups that might be impacted by barriers into participation. Because that's the crux of all of this really, looking at engaging different social groups. What is stopping them currently, and what methods are there to actually overcome these barriers? And we're going to look at that in more detail in future lessons, but today we are going to be introduced to this idea of who is being blocked from participating and what's blocking them, and some examples of how these groups are being blocked from participating or being prevented to engage in physical activity. Because as we should know by now, health is very important. This all-rounded well-being of physical, mental, social, emotional well-being, and we know that physical activity plays such a huge role in all 4 of those areas, let alone fitness itself. So we know that physical activity is important, and what this lesson is going to be looking at is why some people or some groups, some categories are in the minority or left on the fringe. What is it that's stopping them from actually getting involved with PE? So it's a 3-part lesson. We are going to be going through these 3 stages of introducing these social groups. So the 5 examples that you can draw on, talk about and use in your exam. Then we're going to be looking at understanding sort of how or why these social groups aren't participating. So what are the variety of factors that could impact on anyone? You know, it could be you, could be I, could be the person in your family, could be anyone that we know. These factors could affect their participation levels. It's just that the social groups that we're going to look at today, these are impacted more than the average person. So we're going to take a look at those factors which can impact or become a barrier. And then lastly, in the orange, we are going to be able to evaluate a range of these factors and the level of difficulty or the degree to which that they might prevent a social group from engaging in physical activity. And we've got a worked example for each of the social groups. So by the end, you've got a worked example for yourself to take away with you, but also the skill set to work out how to pick out the factor that might be the barrier, and to then evaluate why or how that barrier is actually having an effect on that social group. So we'll get started straight away with, first of all, what is a social group? We've got 4 points down here. Well, a group is a collection with a shared identity, and social or society is this community or mixture of people. So if we combine these two ideas, what we end up with is a group of people that they don't necessarily know each other, but they share similar attributes, they share characteristics. And by identifying categories in a population, we could be talking global, we could be talking international, we could be talking local. You know, this impact of sport, or barriers to sport I should say, it's felt globally, but trying to overcome the barriers on that sort of scale is never going to work. So moving forward with our strategies to overcome these barriers, we have to think more local. How can we impact the people in our direct community? So within this group of, let's say, 1 million people in a city, within that population, how could we categorise people into groups of similarity so that we can start to recognise patterns? People with that sort of attribute or that characteristic, they're not participating in physical activity. Okay, so why? What is it about that shared attribute that is preventing them from participating? If we know the barrier, then we can start to devise plans and strategies to then overcome that barrier. Oh, sorry, last point on there, just that 4th point. people within a particular social group, they have similar views, similar problems, similar challenge, not just similar attributes. For example, income. It could be that they face similar problems and challenges. For example, with income probably comes a high stress or a very work-heavy lifestyle, where they're putting these long hours at work. They're not at home. They're not committed to other things outside of the work to generate this income, perhaps. So they share that problem with other people in their social group. They might not know the other people, but they've got that commonality. They share that characteristic, so we can start to devise strategies that help that person as a collective, rather than just working on people one at a time. So the 5 examples, the 5 different ways that you can group people. Well, this list is very extensive, but the 5 which have been noticed to be hugely impacted by barriers to sport: gender, race, religion / culture, age, the family and friendship groups that we have, and then disability. So gender, religion, age, family, disability. Okay, they're the 5 broader categories, and then you're probably already thinking, well, age, that's quite a big range. That's from birth to death. How's that a category? Everyone's got an age. Surely that means everyone. But we can start to look at it into sort of micro parts. It could be a teenager. Everyone who is currently between 13 and 19, they share that characteristic of being a teen. Now, you yourself, if you're watching this, you're probably in that age bracket. So you share that characteristic with thousands, if not millions of other people in the country, just on your age. So what we can now do is then look at the physical activity patterns of that age group, and we can start to recognise patterns. Are teenagers more sedentary or more active compared to previous generations of teenagers? Where in the country are teenagers active or sedentary? We can start to look for patterns, and then when we see patterns emerge, we can begin to put things in place to try and correct or to try and overcome these barriers. So 5 different ways that we're going to be grouping: gender, race and religion, age, family and friends, and disability. So we'll start off with gender. So what is gender as a social group? Well, men and women have different levels of access to sport. Okay, that's always been the case. From inception of sport, ages ago, there's always been male sports, and there's already, pastimes and recreation, if we're thinking that long ago, but male pastimes, and there's been female pastimes. And until lately, and by lately I mean the last 20 years really has seen the significant improvement in female sport. Not just in quality, but from all sides. The money involved with it, the sponsorship involved with it, the media coverage, the young participation levels. It's all seen a massive increase in the last 20 or so years. So yes, there are progressive changes, but it's one thing for something to change on paper with figures and facts and data. It's another thing for it to change in everyone's mindsets. And it goes both ways. I've put down here, the main argument is going to be female sport. The uptake of younger girls getting involved with sport and then pursuing it into their adult life. That's the main sort of subgroup within gender that is struggling at the moment. Yes, there's been improvement, but on the other side of the conversation, males, they also meet barriers. They also have things to overcome. There are also stereotypes and stigmas around activity choices. You probably won't find many men in a yoga class, for example, or a Pilates class, or a gymnastics club, or a netball team. In fact, there probably aren't many male netball teams out there, if there are any, or leagues, I should say. So that it's often overlooked because the bigger problem at the moment is female sport. But I think the point I'm trying to get across is, don't see it as a one-sided argument or issue. Okay, so we have got sort of both sides of the coin really of there's a gender gap, there is an equality opportunity gap. And not every man, not every woman can do any sport that they like. On paper, they could, legally they can, but socially, we'll go back to that phrase, that social group, the community, the stigma, the attitudes of the people, they might be suppressing certain people getting into certain sports. So, go ahead, there we go. So race, culture and religion. Second social group. Well, people within this social group have a shared faith. They have a shared belief about life, about the outlook on living, how they should, the laws and the codes and the ethics and the morals that they should live by. They have not necessarily written down, but they're ingrained in their everyday lifestyle. And some of them could have an impact on physical activity. There might be certain days in the year or long periods of time throughout the year where, because of dietary changes or because of timings, because of the commitment to prayer, for example, it could rule them out from opportunity to be physically active. That's neither good or bad, it just is. So it could be someone's race or culture that's a higher priority than physical activity. And I'm going to use that word quite a lot in this lesson, priority, especially when it comes to timings and family and economic situations and accessibility, which we'll come to. But prioritising activity is a big issue. And for a lot of these social groups, a big thing is there's just things which are more important than getting into physical activity. So the strategies that we'll need to be looking at isn't just offering activity, it's about trying to sort of restructure values and priorities, try and make physical activity seem more valuable to them so that they give it a little bit more focus and attention. But we'll leave that for strategies. Age, third social group. Like I said before, everyone's got an age, and we've got the range birth to death, but we've got these subgroups. We've got children, we've got teenagers, we've got young adults, we've got middle age, we've got families, we've got retired, we've got old. And at each of these subgroups, there's going to be different sets of limitations and advantages. If we just take the idea, just then about teenager, what are the pros about being a teenager when it comes to activity? Well, you've got PE. You've got a regimented, set time, on a timetable, protected time to be active. Now, whether or not teenagers are using that time maximally, you'll probably know yourself if you do or you don't. Hopefully, if you're watching this, you're someone who does use it a little bit better than most. But that's protected time. You won't find in, let's say, a parent of a family of 4 children, you won't find a parent with a timetabled slot that they can go and play or do their own personal activity. Not structured, not legally binding. PE in school is legal. It's by law we have to offer PE to younger people. You don't have that when you're older. It's not a law to be active. So instead, the parents have now got to, in that age bracket, make the choice, prioritise physical activity over something else. And when you are 25, 35, 45, 55, there's going to be other things which eat up into your time. For example, driving your children to their sporting fixture. So there are limitations, but there are advantages. Okay, it's this pros and cons. The child probably hasn't got their own money. So they can't go and pay for the gym whenever they want to. They can't go and sign up for fitness classes. The adult, the parent, well, they're working, they're earning, they've got their income. If they wanted to, they could push some of their monthly income toward the best gym membership that they could afford, if they prioritised it, because they've got the money, because they're of the right age to have money. And then older people, Or if they're retired, they've got all the time in the world. But have they got the health? Have they got the transport? Have they got the finances to pay for it? So there's pros and cons to all of these subgroups of age. And we go, like I said, the young have fantastic provision, but limited by finances. What if the child wants to play one sport and the parent doesn't like it? Is the parent still going to take that child to that sport? A blowing up activity at the moment is parkour. You might be interested in it. Parents, probably not so. Why? Because, on the face of it, parkour, it could be seen as hanging around on the street corner, jumping over things in a dangerous environment. Now, I know that's not the root of parkour. It's far more sort of gymnastics and athletics based. But looking on as an older person who hasn't really experienced parkour, that might be what they see. They form a view, they form an attitude towards parkour, and they say, no child, you're not going to be going to parkour club. I don't like it, I don't support it, so I'm not going to fund it. So age plays a huge, huge factor or role in these social grouping situations. And then, like I said down at the bottom, the old may have the time, they may have the need for the activity, but no access to transport. They haven't got a car anymore, they're giving their licence back. They haven't got the physical health to go to your regular gym. They need that specialised equipment and support from a personal trainer, but they can't afford that. Who's gonna foot the bill? Their children, so the middle-aged people who are already footing the bill for their children. So, fourth group, moving on. Family, friends, peers. Now, I've said here how close units. Now, this could be a family dynamic, 5 or 6 people in a family. It could be a good group of mates, a close unit. There's a reason, not so much with family because you're born into that, but especially with a peer group, you will share something. There will be a reason that you are in a group of mates, in a circle of friends. And it's likely because you share similar opinions to each other. You think the same on certain topics. You've got the same sense of humour. You care about the same things. Well, where does physical activity fit into everyone's opinions? If you're in a social group or a family dynamic where the general consensus is, I don't really care about physical activity, well, you're probably going to absorb those views and opinions, and even if you think you really should be active, well, if I go out of my way to be active by myself, what are my other 6 friends or family members going to think of me? I'm being very different to what they think is normal. I don't really want that. I don't want that opinion forming in their minds of me being different. So I'm gonna stay clear of physical activity. Okay, not peer pressure, but social normity. It's the social norm, the normal values held within that social group. So I said at the bottom there, that was a negative example, but they could be really positive. If you're in a group where you all love going to the gym, and every other day you end up all meeting there, there's 4 or 5 of you meet up, you do your cardio, you go for a swim, you do a bit of weightlifting, doesn't matter, boy, girl, man, woman, doesn't really matter. You're all in that group together because you've got a shared interest of physical activity. That's a good thing, to be surrounded by people with that opinion of physical activity. You're more likely to express that opinion yourself if you're surrounded by people who also express it. Lastly, 5th social group, we have got disability. Now, disabilities come in infinite shapes, sizes, differences, severity. A lot of the time, disabilities aren't always the mindset around it is changing now. It's not a disability, it's differently abled. Because I would challenge any abled person by your traditional definition to beat someone who is disabled by traditional definition in the wheelchair race, or to compete in blind football, or to play any one of these modified sports which are designed for disabled people, but they can compete and play these sports at such a high level that it doesn't really matter about the disability. That's just where their strength is. And the sport is designed around their bodily capabilities. So disabilities, there isn't a set definition other than it's a variation from your average. Maybe that's a way to put it. It's a variation from average in shape, size, differences, severity, coordination. It could be cognitive, it could be physical. It's a whole range of disabilities. So within this massive category, we will then have even more subcategories. So, as I said there, in most cases, a disability in sport is an attribute of a person that may hinder their effective participation in the standard version. So something is different, which would make participation in the traditional activity or sport a little bit difficult. So what do we do with that traditional one? Well, we modify it so that it becomes completely accessible for those who are differently abled, who have a slight modification, let's say, to the average being. But, like that last point says there, yes, this is one big category, and there will be some broad barriers, but each subgroup will face their own unique challenges, their own unique barriers to participating in sport. You know, something as simple as, well, if you've got a blind person, they might be, average in every other sense of the word apart from their eyesight, but they won't be able to drive the car to the leisure centre. So who's going to drive them to the leisure centre? Whereas someone who is an amputee and missing a lower limb on the leg, for example, they could get themselves there, they could drive there, they could walk there, they could cycle there, as long as they're set up with artificial limbs or however they function. They can get there, but they're still technically disabled by the use of that traditional word. So we've got these subgroups with their own unique barriers. So when we're looking at strategizing ways to overcome this particular social group, we have to bear in mind that there's going to be such an array of subgroups. So it's so far from being one group. Always bear in mind that there's going to be plenty of smaller ones within this overarching category. So that was the first part, introducing those 5 groups. Okay, introducing those 5 groups where we had, got to race back to the top, gender, race, religion, age, family and friends, and then disability. So they're the 5 broad groups that we can talk about going forward now into the factors. So what are the broad things that go wrong or we haven't quite got right yet? What is stopping any of these social groups and everyone else, stopping them from being physically active? So hopefully by the end of this we'll understand how participation in physical activity can differ between social groups based on these factors. First one. Oh. There we go. So you can see me. So first one, we have attitudes. Well, first of all, what is an attitude? Well, an attitude is a person's thoughts, feelings, actions that they hold about something. I think I missed a Y off there, never mind. So these are a person's thoughts, feelings and actions that they hold or do towards something. And it could be extremely positive. It could be extremely negative. It could be anywhere in between. It could be absent. If you don't know or feel or act towards something, then you just haven't got an attitude. It's absent. Okay, it's not one thing or another. It's not good or bad, happy or sad. It's this open-ended question. What's this person's attitude like? And there's a number of contributors. So we're not born with an attitude. Well, I suppose some people might argue that we are, but we're not born with attitudes. There's contributing factors, things that funnel into them over the course of our life, such as our friends' opinions, such as our education, such as our childhood, our previous experience. If we try something and we succeed in it, that's going to be really positive and strong. That's going to be a happy memory. So when the option of doing something similar to that again in the future comes up, oh yeah, I'm going to do that because it felt really good the last time I did it. If you go with mates and you have a great time and you have fun, well, you're probably going to do it again because it felt good the last time. Same can be said for the reverse. If something negative happens, if we learn something which we don't like, or we experience a sense of, confusion or embarrassment or, physical pain, perhaps. If you play a certain sport, let's just say you play American football and you get a big hit and it hurts, you're probably not going to go back and try it again. Unless we can shape that attitude. A friend or a peer or a role model can help pick that person back up, alter the attitude, and then send them off with a slightly more positive outlook. So a person may want to do something, but because of the negative attitudes of others, that judgment, that opinion that they hold about them, that might be enough to stop them from going to do something. So either your own attitude could build you up or knock you down from doing a certain type of physical activity, or the attitude of someone else can have an impact on you. If you have a negative attitude towards physical activity, but someone that you trust and admire, they have a positive attitude and you want to do good in their eyes, then you might sort of overcome your negative attitude, give it a go, and end up liking it. Second one, role models. What is a role model? People of significance. People who we look up to, that we aspire to be like, or what they have impresses us. And we want to emulate their actions and behaviours. We want to copy and mimic them. They're really powerful if you can see similarities. So if that pro or that superstar had similar beginnings to yourself, so if you, grew up in the same area, or they came from a similar sort of family background, or they made a break at the same time that you're trying to make a break. If there's similarities, you can see yourself in them. And if they made it, and they had similar starting position to me, then maybe I can make it. So providing people these role models is really powerful because it can always act as that guiding light, that guiding star where everything else might be going on, like negative attitudes, family thinking less of you, friends, peer pressure, there might be some embarrassment. But if you've got that role model as that rock or anchor that you keep on aiming for and remembering that if they did it, I can do it, and I want what they've got, it might be enough to pull that person through. So this, applied to social groups, are there role models for the social groups that we've spoken about? Are there enough differently abled role models? Are there enough people of a certain religion, race or culture who are a role model in the media? Yes, no, maybe. Third, we have accessibility or access, and just as the word suggests, how easy is it to get to the place that the sport is being played or the activity is being run? Now, in places where it's small, so it's a small population, it's a isolated location, well, that's not going to be a very big magnet for private sector investment. There's not going to be businesses and gyms lining up and competing to set up in the middle of a village. Because a village is small, especially if that village is economically distressed. If it's not doing very well on the socioeconomic standings, it's not going to draw in that private sector business. Therefore, there might not be much opportunity because no one's coming there to set the opportunity up. So then there could be a lack of provision because no one's there building the providers. And I've put there as well, but the transport aspect. If there's not things to actually travel to, well, that's a bad thing. You can't actually access something. But if you can't actually get somewhere either, because you haven't got your flexible transport, you haven't got the car. If we think back to age, We've got a young person, teenagers, probably not driving. Maybe if you're 17, 16 on a scooter, if you're a teenager, you're not driving. So how are you getting to the sports provider? Getting a train, getting a bus? Have you got the money for the bus or the train? Do they run at the right times that you need to get to the places and then back for you to actually access that? Yes or no? Maybe. Again, it's just a factor to consider. Is that sports provider accessible? Yes, or who can access it? Who can't access it? What can we do about those who can't access it? Next up, we have media coverage. So the prevalence of sport, sports performers, a type of sport, a gender of the sport, an age of the sport, what's being covered. I guarantee if you looked into a paper, you would see a very narrow selection of sport being portrayed. It's got better in the last 10, 15, 20 years. It has got better, but it's still dominated by the traditional male sports. Still dominated. Why? Because society likes them, and that's what people want to, or what the majority of people want to read about are traditional male sports, because they've been traditional and male dominated for so long. So it's a difficult thing, because you need to change both at the same time. Change society's perception. Okay, how do we do that? Well, we cover it in the media. But why can't we cover it in the media? Because no one wants to read about it. Why not? Because they don't know about it. Why not? Because it's not in the media. So we gradually need to change things from both angles, from both perspectives, to try and get as many different types of activity in front of people, because that's when they're going to learn. Look at that last point. All the while a select few sports, traditional, male dominated, all the while they remain in the spotlight, they're going to be the ones that people learn about, study about, are immersed in, that they support, and that they end up wanting to get into themselves. I wonder if for 2 years no football, no rugby, no cricket was presented in the media. I wonder what would happen. If people wanted to find out about the schools, they could still text someone, or there'd be a website that they could go to. But if it was just taken down, out of the papers, off the main internet sites, taken down, and instead fringe sports were promoted. Ultimate frisbee, petanque, tookball. If these were promoted and these were the ones in front of people, I wonder what would happen to participation rates in those sports. It would probably skyrocket, because that's what people are looking at. That's what people are now learning about and gaining an interest for. But all the while media coverage focuses on this select pool, then that's where the focus is going to stay. And that's where the money's going to stay. That's where the provision is going to stay. Sexism and stereotyping. So sexism and stereotyping. We'll start with stereotyping, which is this: to assume something of someone based on an attribute that they've shown you. So because they are, or because they have attribute A, I'm going to assume that they've also got attribute B, because that's what I've heard, that's what I've learned, that's what I've been told, that's what might have happened on a couple of occasions. But I'm just going to assume anyone with attribute A will also have attribute B. So we're typing them, we're assuming who they are or what they are. So if you do X, then you are Y. Even though they're not actually related, it's this social norm. People have come to assume as a general population that the two things are related. So some could be good, some could be bad, but even the good ones, it's technically you're still assuming something about someone. So I think it might be on the next page, but I might have edited it out actually. But I said gym goers typically are confident. That's a stereotype. Footballers are generally arrogant and dramatic. That's a stereotype. Or they get injured easily. or they dive. Rugby players are big, butch, strong, manly. Now these are all stereotypes. They're not my opinions. They're the general opinion where if you just asked anyone what's the first word that you think of when that sport comes to mind, that'll probably be a stereotype. Nothing should come to mind. But what do you think a rugby player's like? Don't know. Depends on the person. That's what the answer should be. Not what do you think a rugby player's like? Brave. Well, why? Why do you think they're brave? I don't know actually. So stereotyping is assuming something of someone based on one of their attributes, normally based on a sporting choice, which then leads us into sexism, where sexism is the negative treatment or negative perception of someone of either sex, male or female, based on a sporting choice. And it's most prevalent when we see someone from either sex choosing a sport which there's a stereotype that sport's for one sex and one sex only. So, I've put these up here. Some sports typically thought of as a men's or women's sport. Now, I haven't put which one is a male sport, which one's a female sport. But netball, you're probably already thinking something. Gymnastics, rugby, basketball. Now, all four of those sports are accessible to both sexes. However, if someone from the opposite sex chooses to pursue a sport deemed to be for the other sex, that's where we start to get that negative treatment. We start to get that prejudice of their character. We're prejudging what we think this person is going to be like because of their sporting choice, when really there's no grounds for that. That's a stereotype. We're thinking, if you do this sport, you have these traits. I'll put it down at the bottom there. If you do this male sport, you must have male traits and be masculine. Therefore, as a woman participating in a male sport, then surely you have these masculine traits. That's a stereotype. It's a link which doesn't exist apart from in general consensus from society. And the same the other way. You have a typically female sport, a female-dominated sport. For example, rhythmic, artistic performances like gymnastics. Now, if you look at the components of fitness which gymnastics require, it's very similar to any other sport. But gymnastics has just got this generalised perception that it's a female sport. Therefore, when a guy goes to do gymnastics, we get that stereotype. Well, you must be feminine. And it's come from years of just societal grumblings, social norms, which have just rotted through and will carry on rotting through for a long time to come. But gradually we're starting to change it. But sexism is then actually acting on it. No, actually saying something to the person, actually being harmful, having negative emotions, from not covering it in the media, from making decisions, let's say for example, to do with the rules of rugby. Now, if the rules of rugby or the rules of boxing, these typically male-orientated sports, as female participation rates increase, sexism would be the manipulation of the rules. Well, why? Why should the rules change? They shouldn't. They're just a person playing that sport within the confines of the rules. So sexism it's almost stereotyping in action based on a person's sex. Culture and religion. So, different religions, different cultures, they have different traditions, they've got different days which are marked as holy and they respect those. It's a day for faith. Festivals could last a weekend, it could be a longer period, it could be a substantial period of time. Think about Ramadan, where we've got a month or two of dietary manipulation, let's call it, because it's in line with their faith and their beliefs. But the impact of that on physical activity is, energy is going to be low. Could be things like their community views, or if a culture or religion is born in a certain country and in that country certain weather conditions or resources or geography are suited to a certain sport or activity or pastime, well, that's going to eke into sort of the family and friendship dynamic. That if you're from a certain religion or country or location, then you should pursue a certain batch of sports and not the others. Why? Because that's what we've always done. That's our upbringing, that's our culture, our identity. Family. Obviously, we've spoken a little bit about friends, we've spoken a little bit about role models. Well, family is this unit where a lot of decisions are made within the family that are very impactful on the members of that family. The parents might make decisions for the children for the good of the family. The child thinks they're getting hard done by. A child might want to do something, the parent says no. The parent might want to do something but can't because they've got obligations and responsibilities to care for the children, and maybe their parents as well if they're older. But beyond this sort of time and money relationship, we've got this idea of nurturing the young. And the child is typically going to become a copy of the parent to a certain degree, because the parents, two people, are having a massive influence over the young person, especially in the formative years when they're really young. Then you go off to school, then you get your own friends, then you start reading, you get information from other areas, but initially you get it all from your parents. They teach you your first words, your first steps. So their attitudes, their values and beliefs, guarantee they're going to be ingrained into you as well. It's going to take something quite big and different to actually come into your life and start changing that. It's going to take a long time. That's why from childhood to adulthood, that teenage year, it's typically quite volatile at home, because the child is learning about actually who they want to become a little bit more. They're actually growing their own identity rather than just being the sponge which has absorbed mum and dad for the first 9 or 10 years of their life. Same goes for physical activity views. If a family or the parents love a certain sport, chances are the kids are going to pursue it as well. Because that's the culture of the family. That's what we do, that's what we've always done, that's what you all do. Free time. If you haven't got time to play sport, you're not going to play sport. Tell that to a pro athlete. Well, that's their priority. I said at the start of this, I'm going to talk about this priority thing. There's no such thing as free time. You just make time. You allocate time. And for physical activity, you need to allocate time. If you're a busy person, as a student, as a parent, you need to allocate time. Be it for study, be it for work, be it for travel, be it for family, be it for socialising. Okay, that was 5 things, I think. That was 5 things that I just listed ahead of physical activity. So if you're not prioritising physical activity, you're not going to be able to allocate time for it. So the question is, what else is taking up the time? Can you swap it for something? Familiarity. So this is a little bit of a strange word. It's some water. It's a little bit of a, not a soft one, but it's more to do with confidence and comfort. So, and building habits and routines. Because if you went to a training session and you went with a mate and it was brand new, you've never been to that training session before, you don't mind about being a little bit scared about that because you've got your friend with you. Now, if you've gone for 10 years in a row and you know it inside and out, chances are you're not going to need the friend with you because you've already got that confidence, you've already got that routine set up. So a big barrier to physical activity is getting people started. If they're not familiar with the movements or the skills, it's going to be a very steep learning curve. It's going to take a lot of trial and error and failure and negatives to actually get somewhere to be able to enjoy the physical activity properly. You may have done this before, but if you've ever gone out for a jog or a run and it's the first one you've done in a couple of months, it's going to feel so awkward. You feel lumpy and bumpy, your knees are hurting. You feel really unfit, you ache the next couple of days. But if you stick that out, if you keep that confidence, if you keep that motivation, you'll gradually get into a routine, you gradually learn the route, your body gets used to running, and suddenly it's really comfortable. And you feel like you're getting enjoyment out of it because you've built up this routine and habit. You know what to expect. But in the initial stages, it's all unfamiliar. And unfamiliarity is a barrier to participation. Education. I'll put that on there. So education is quite a big one, and it links into a lot of other factors as well. The biggest ones being attitudes, media coverage, because education is about learning the physical activities, learning the concepts, learning the skills, but also learning where to go, when to go. It's advertising, if anything else. Are the physical activities being advertised appropriately to the social groups who are suffering from lack of physical activity? Is it out there? Have they been told about it? If they have they taken it on board? Especially the whys, I put it in there, and the third point down, and why it's important to do so. Here's a club, this is when it is, this is why you should do it. If anything, that's the most important, because that will get them starting to change their mind and prioritise it. If you're not told why to do something, then it's just knowledge. It's just information. There's a club at 6 at the club. There's a club going on at 6 o'clock at the leisure centre. Okay, it's going to be good because you're going to sleep better as a result of physical activity. I've been tired recently, I might give it a go. I'm going to prioritise it. I'm now going to have free time or allocate time towards it because I can see the benefit, because I've been educated. Socioeconomic conditions. So this is your space and your money and sort of the overall economic financial situation. And this can apply to the activity, the costings of it. Do you have the access to the equipment, the facilities, the memberships, the kit? Yes or no? Maybe. Could be too expensive, therefore you can cross that one off the list. It might determine their location. Going back earlier to, I think it was in Access, where I was talking about private sector funding, where for-profit businesses going in to set up these niche activity sessions. It's called hot pod yoga or something, or dog yoga, or trampoline bounce yoga, all of these HIIT workouts, CrossFit gyms. These are all quite niche activity sectors born out of a need. You've got people who want to be active, they want to try something new, and they've got money to throw at it. So the businesses come in, they set up the opportunity, they advertise and educate the opportunity, and people buy into it. Well, in places in socioeconomic distress, people haven't got the spare money to throw at a brand new idea. Therefore, the private businesses aren't going to go in, invest in a facility, so there's just going to stay nothing there. So it stays trapped in a lack of opportunity space. Adaptation and inclusion. So, as stigma, stereotyping and negative attitudes towards modified sports and disabilities are changing, so are the traditional sports. I spoke earlier about the disability being this massive group. Well, adaptation and inclusion is how sports are dealing with it. So has a sport gone through an adaptive process? Have they modified things? Have they worked to tweak funding? Have they tweaked facility space? Have they tweaked the equipment to try and open it up and include as many people as possible? Yes or no? At the bottom there might be a reason why they haven't, if they haven't. Because the cost of adaptation could be cutting the provision of traditional offerings. If you change something and offer so many things, you spread yourself so thin. A leisure centre has only got so many basketball courts, badminton courts, astroturf spaces. So the more sports are adapting and changing, great, but to what end? Suddenly we had basketball, football, badminton Now we've got the 4 or 5 variants of each one, and suddenly we've got 12 different sports to try and run in the same space in the same amount of time. So what takes the hit? Do we take away traditional sports? And suddenly a lot of people are going to be faced with no opportunities because they're overpopulated anyway? Or do we cut the adaptations and the inclusive versions of the sport? And suddenly that already marginalised group is going to be left on the outside again. Which leads us to our final section, which is evaluating the impact of barriers on social groups. So we're now going to take the attributes, the factors that we've recently looked at, and we're going to apply them to the 5 social groups. And now we're going to see, almost in a worked example, how that could lead to a negative barrier. So we will start. Move myself over here for you. So we'll start with gender. And what I've done is put the factors. What have we got here? Factors down on the right-hand side, where I've highlighted in red the ones which I've worked into this example. Now, you could probably work any number of these factors in. Okay, family, time, education, economic, all of these things could play a role, but in this scenario, for this social group, these are the most significant. There could be a lack of familiarity if a man or woman or boy or girl wanted to pursue a sport that none of their peers or anyone they know shares that same interest. That goes back to that sort of stereotype, which I've highlighted in red as well. That stereotyping of, well, why do you want to play that sport? You're a man, you're a woman. This is your predetermined sport choices. So why do you want to almost cross over and play one of them? You're a little bit strange. You're doing that, but the rest of us don't want to do that. So suddenly, that person wanting to get involved hasn't got a peer. So they're not only going into a new sport or new activity, they're going against negative opinions and attitudes and stereotypes. They're going to be judged, and they haven't got a peer to go with it. That's going to be a very unfamiliar environment. They won't know anything there. So that could lead to a negative situation, and then they drop out. So they might not go in at all. Secondly, poor media coverage. For female sport or for young performance, there's very little in the way of role models. Again, it is improving. I know it's improving, and it's great that it is, but it's still got so far to go. There's loads of role models in male-dominated traditional sports. There's less current and exciting and intriguing role models in fringe female sports or fringe male sports. And with that lack of role model, like I said before, where's that guiding light for that previous paragraph? That the person who hasn't got someone to take to a brand new class. It might be they're joining a rugby team, for example. They've got no friend to take along with them. They've never played rugby, and they've had people almost laughing at them, embarrassing them that they're interested in doing it. Well, if there was media coverage that they could turn around and say, look, this person does it, that could help them. But there isn't loads of that at the moment. So without role models, without that peer support, it's going to be very difficult to get these marginalised gender groups into the sport. Another thing with that role model, there's no examples. There's no one beating the stereotype, or there are some, but not loads. Well, that person got lucky, that's rare. They're still in the minority. Yes, they're in the paper, yes, they're England captain, but they're still in the minority. So show me the rest. Where is it? Haven't got it? Still strange. So we always need this evidence, this increasing body of evidence needs to get bigger to try and gradually wear away on these people's social norms. Second one, we have the religion and culture groups, whereby we've got these, there we go, the 12 factors, and I've highlighted 4. family attitudes. They almost go together. The attitudes of the family. In fact, I think that might even be the first one, maybe? Perhaps not. So the long-standing cultural traditions of an area. If you're born into a family, if you're born into a country, a town, a city, where there is a definite culture of generational ideas. My parents did it, your parents did it, their parents did it, then their parents did it. It's been handed down and no one wants to be the change. Very similar with religion and culture. That faith is old, it's enduring, it's rock solid, it's not budging. So as soon as someone might have an idea to try something a little bit different, they're going to be talked out of it. Or if they're not, they're going to be tried to. People are going to try and give them their negative opinion. They shouldn't, but they probably will because it goes against their own beliefs. I've put there, well, definitely religion as well, not just the family and the attitudes of a community, but religion itself, the holy days, those festivals. We spoke about those periods of time where dietary manipulation might be going on. That's going to impact on sporting performance, going to impact on energy. If you can't eat or drink from sunrise to sunset, physical activity is going to be tough, and the priority drops down, and there's nothing wrong with that. It just is, and that is a barrier to performing physical activity. So there needs to be modifications made around that. I used to lifeguard, and when I was younger, I remember there was, I can't remember the exact name of it, but for a couple of weekends there were shifts going from 2 a.m. until 3 a.m. or something like that, 1 a.m. till 3 a.m. And it was to do with religious celebrations. Again, I'm not entirely sure what exactly, but the leisure centre stayed open for those hours, so that then they could come in, they could have an hour or two of, they eat their food, then they celebrate, or they exercise first, and then they have a bit of a celebration. So there's the opportunity to do some activity if they want to. Age groups. Here we go, just put the 6 up again. So family, time, economic, adaptation. Now I've put adaptation down. I'll start from the top there really, or from the bottom I should say. Older people. They're not going to be able to do the traditional activity. They're not going to be able to play the contact version, the high-speed version, all the rules, all the regulations, the full size. They're not going to be able to do that. They're going to need the modification. But is that modification available? Are there enough people of their age wanting to do it? Yes, great. Then we can put something on. It's going to be cost-effective, or it's going to be worthwhile. It's probably not going to be much fun to run a basketball club for older people and one person turns up. For younger people, family, time, economic situation, those 3 things really big. Who controls the young people's money? The parent. Who controls the young person's time? The parent. So whatever the parent says or thinks or prioritises or plans, that goes for the child. So if the child wants to pursue something and the parent doesn't think it's feasible because there's a clash, the child's not going to get to do it. That's a barrier. So what are some strategies around that? One thing could be school interventions. The explosion of after-school activities and clubs is still going on. It's still on the rise. Most schools now, there's something going on every single day. After school, before school. Both run by the PE department and by some external providers. Family and friends groups. Now this ties quite closely into this age idea of the parents run the show in that dynamic. But if we look at it from this idea of role models, children become what they watch. I've already mentioned this. So if the parents are open-minded, then the child is more likely to be able to explore whatever they think they might want to do. But if the parents are closed-minded and they think, no, this is our sport, this is our location, our country, this is what I did, what my parents did, it's tradition, then that will get passed down as well. Sort of going back to that idea of we're the average of the group that we're in most. So with our friends group, if it's a physical activity group, fantastic. Meet up, go for a run, go for a jog, be active, book a tennis court in the summer. Or is it going to be a case of going for a picnic, going shopping, going on holiday? And what's the values of the group? That will tell you what your likely actions are going to be, because you average out what they're doing. I've also put in there, again, linking to parents within the family, to do with this education and media side of things. Now, this is quite an extreme example, but it's still valid. If the parent really doesn't want a child playing a certain sport or developing a certain attitude, I suppose even if they don't feel that strongly about it, they might sort of unknowingly filter the media going into the house. Let's say the mum's always got athletics commentary on, or the dad's always got Sky Sports on. Then that's what's going to be heard. That's what's going to be surrounding the young people. So they're picking up on all of these small things and building attitudes and positive attitudes towards athletics and football. Not the fringe sports, which might be where their skill lies. They might have the natural physical ability to be the next world champion Bulls player. But they're not going to get that chance because they haven't got the education, because it was stifled at source by the parents. And lastly, disability. There's a distinct lack of media, distinct lack of role models in disability sport or modified sports. Distinct lack. Pick up any news article or any paper, any journal, any website. If you were to look at the ratio of traditional sport to modified sport, I'd even argue less than 1%. Apart from times where you might have the Paralympics on, outside of that scale event, I would say less than 1% is actually to do with modified and disabled sport. Now, I don't know how closely that mimics or mirrors sort of the participation stats. I don't know how closely that they are linked, but regardless, if we want to try and promote any sport, especially modified sport, because we know they're in a marginalised group, then we want to get it in front of them. We want to get it in front of people so that the perception around it changes, I should say. We can suddenly put these role models in public eye for people to try and be like, to try and aspire to be like. At the moment, that's not happening. Another downside is that with these lower numbers of participation, or lower participation numbers, I should say, as adaptations and modifications do come out, costs will become apparent. The specialist equipment designed specifically for a modified sport or modified game, it's going to take money. Is physical activity a high enough priority to actually justify spending that much money? Yes or no? Who knows? It could be that for some of these newly adapted sports, they actually get scheduled at times where it doesn't affect the traditional running of sport. So brilliant, we've just introduced wheelchair basketball at the local leisure centre, but it runs 12 till 1 Tuesdays and Thursdays. Okay, young people are at school and adults are at work. So what good's that? Well, we can't put it Monday 7 till 8 because that's when we get 150 people turning up for Power League football. And that brings in 50% of the revenue for the leisure centre. If we were to swap them, the leisure centre would go bust in 6 months. So some more barriers. With these adaptations and modifications and growth of the fringe sports, there's bills to pay. And that brings us to the end of sort of these two sections, really, where we've got the the 5 social groups: gender, race, religion, culture, age, family and peers, or family and friends, and then disability. And we've looked in quite a lot of detail actually at those 12 different factors then: family time, familiarity, education, economic, adaptation, attitude, role models, access, media, stereotype, and religion. We've gone into those and looked at sort of what they are and how they have the power to affect badly and positively, but we'll look at that with strategies. And we've also looked at how each of them might play a role in blocking 5 of these social groups from engaging in physical activity. And that is that. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining this lesson. I hope it was of use. If you do want more lessons like this, then the petutor.com or GCSEPportal.com are the other places to go, where we upload these lessons, all of the PowerPoints, all of the worksheets, quizzes, revision videos, much more, and we run weekly group classes with them as well. So if you did want to find out some more of that, then the petutor.com will be a place to go. But yeah, like this, subscribe if you need to, and yes, I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson. See you later.